All right, welcome everybody to the Symposium on Cognitive Skills and Economic Outcomes. Thanks for being here despite the tough competition in the other rooms. There is a collection of 4 papers as always. I'm not going to spend time on reading through them. You will see them sequentially. But let me tell you that I compiled this because I think it's kind of a nice mix of more and less mature research and also more and less mature researchers presenting that research. So let me start right away because we have very little time with the first presentation. I will kick it off. It doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Okay. So our trick doesn't work somehow. Okay. Muss man das wieder ändern?
Ja, genau. Du musst hier drücken irgendwie. Kannst du auf duplizieren, wenn nicht da. Weißt du, wie das geht? Den Zuschauer kannst du nicht.
Was ist so? Nee, ich weiß nicht genau, wie es geht. Okay. We spent the whole break in trying to figure it out, but it still doesn't work. Wie war denn das? So, probably need the technician once more.
Wenn man hier, wenn man es keiner sieht, dann können wir auch suchen.
Ja, man kann das irgendwie machen.
Hier.
Machen wir es andere. Wir haben den Shortcut nicht fürs Duplizieren, das hat er schon wieder geändert.
Genau, kannst du doch mal duplizieren.
Kannst du das mal wieder einstellen?
Windows P.
Windows P. Okay.
Dann musst du nochmal hier Dings und dann was. Du musst noch einmal reinklicken, genau.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry for that. We'll figure it out by the end of the conference, I think. Okay, so I will kick off the symposium myself with a paper that is now titled The Evolution of Returns to Skills Around the World. So a little bit different than in a program. And it's joined with Rick Henyushek, you will see more of him later, Guido Schwert and Ludger Wessmann. And actually, I was not supposed to give this presentation. Guido was supposed to give it, but unfortunately, he can't be with us due to personal reasons. Let me also say that this is very much work in progress, and the very first time this whole project is presented, so your comments and questions can still make a huge difference on the content. So what's the motivation for this whole project? I'm an economist, and one of the central questions in labor economics is really how human capital is rewarded in the labor market. This whole research started way back in the 70s with Jacob Minzer, and the focus at the time, and still often today, is really on years of schooling, so school attainment, to actually measure human capital or skills. But this kind of approach, at least implicitly, assumes that school quality doesn't differ between countries and over time. So as if a year of schooling in Peru would mean the same as a year of schooling in Japan, or a year of schooling in 1975 means the same as one today. And we all know that this is not realistic. Ludger and Rick have made this point very, very strongly and clearly in a 2008 paper where they showed that years of schooling have no independent impact on economic growth over and above its impact on cognitive skills, right? But this was the macroeconomic level. The PIAAC data actually allow to go on the micro level, on the individual level, because we have, as you all know, direct test scores at the individual level as well as wages, right? And this is what you need, basically, for estimating returns or wage premia of skills. What you also have is this nice international perspective. So you really have comparable skills over countries, and by now, with cycle 2, we also have comparable skills over time. So using this whole package of data, we want to contribute to the literature on the evolution or the changes in returns to skills. There's a little bit out there already, mainly by Harvard economist David Deming and some other guys from Scandinavian countries, so always on very peculiar samples, or particular samples, I should say, US or certain Scandinavian countries. And what they are also doing, they always have like one specific cognitive skill measure, for instance, from military tests, right? And what they find is returns to cognitive skills have decreased over time. And they explain that with, you know, routine cognitive tasks being replaced by machine, by technology, and so on and so forth. So it makes sense, or it seems to make sense. But we are asking a little bit of a different question, a more subtle question. We want to understand how the returns to numeracy versus literacy have evolved over time. And this is more than just semantics. Obviously, and we have heard that before in the first symposium here, numeracy and literacy are two different types of skills that are used to perform different tasks and that are also subject to different economic forces. Also, their supply may be different. Just think of the STEM discussion we are witnessing all over the world, right? This pertains to numeracy skills. Okay, let's skip to literature and come directly to what we are actually doing. So we are using both cycles of PIAAC, and what's so great about that is that we also have over time comparability, but also several domains of skills, right? Numeracy and literacy is what we are focusing on because this is you know, what has been tested in cycle 1 and in cycle 2. What's really great is also that testing took on average 1 hour, so we have really very detailed skill assessments. What we also have in PIAAC is a very rich background questionnaire that includes wages and many other information. And I know that you know, in an intimate way because I was actually involved as an expert in the expert commission of the background questionnaire for cycle 2, so I know very well what's in there. And one particular thing that's in there in cycle 2, which was really cool, is non-cognitive skills. Beatrice works a lot on that. We also have a little bit in the paper. I will not get to that today, but it's really cool that we have that right now. So with this whole, you know, with these whole features of PIAAC, I think it's really the best available data set to study returns to skills across countries and over time. Yeah, so people have not used it enough, in my opinion. It's really great, great work can be done with PIAAC. Okay, so what we will do, or what I will show you today, is two types of skill returns, right, or wage premium of skills. Either the kind of traditional approach of just using one of the domains, either numeracy or literacy. We could also use years of schooling. It will look very similar. And what we call conditional returns to skills, which means that we are controlling for the other skill domain. So when we have numeracy returns, we also control for literacy and vice versa, right? And you will see this will give very different answers to the question, how did returns to skills evolve over time? So let me share very briefly the key findings in case I don't finish, which is likely. In a traditional approach where we have just one skill measure at a time, we do see the same return decline across countries that Deming and others have also found, right? Returns to cognitive skills have decreased in most countries. But this you know, changes quite a bit when we actually account for the other skill domain as well. Here we see that on average across countries, returns are broadly stable with a huge cross-country heterogeneity. So we have many countries where returns decreased a lot, other countries where returns have increased a lot, and there is a very interesting rebalancing across domains. What I mean by that is that we have countries like Germany, the US, and also others where numeracy returns increased over time and literacy returns at the same time decreased, right? And you will see more of that later. But we also have countries like Korea and Japan, no, not Korea, we don't have Korea in there, Japan and Singapore, where it's actually the other way around. Okay, that's the kind of quick teaser on the paper. Let's get to the details. I know that all of you are experts in PIAAC, but let me still give you a very brief introduction on what the data we are using, especially the sample we are using. So PIAAC obviously provides nationally representative data. Cycle 1 had 39 countries, Cycle 2 has 31 countries. The overlap, which we could potentially use for our project, is 26 countries that participated in both cycles. Unfortunately, the public use file is not yet that great, to be honest. It only has earnings for 21 countries, which is the potential sample we could currently use for the project. Okay. When it comes to the estimation sample, we focus on prime age workers, and we do that because we show in earlier work that only the earnings of these older workers are actually a good approximation of lifetime earnings or earnings potential. So prime age workers 35 to 54 is really the group you want to look at when estimating returns to skills. We focus further on workers with a strong commitment on the labor market, meaning full-time workers with more than 30 hours or 30 and more hours per week. And we exclude self-employed, not because we don't like them or we don't find them important. They're very important, but they don't have hourly earnings information in PIAAC. Since this is our main outcome, we exclude them in the main estimation. We show on the paper, or if there would be a paper, you would see it there, that these, these sample restrictions, how they would affect the results. So we would also have more encompassing samples there, but I will not go down that route today. Regarding the skills, just very quickly, the currency in how we are measuring skills is standard deviation, so it's a typical Z standardization that education people know very well. With one tweak, to ensure comparability over time, we, for the cycle 2 skills, use the standard deviation of cycle 1, round 1. But that's just a currency issue. It doesn't affect the results in any, a very meaningful way. Earnings is a little bit more tricky. As I said, the public use file in its current form is not just great. Let's put it like that. And one thing that is a little bit difficult is that many countries actually only have earnings as decile positions in the wage distribution. But luckily, the OECD very quickly after release of the data also released the decile medians, which we can use to actually give more meaning, more information to the decile positions, right? And for comparability over time, we use the same approach for cycle 1. In cycle 1, we have many more continuous earnings information, but we still restrict them in a way that for the same countries, we have the decile median earnings in cycle 1 and cycle 2. And we also, just for the economists here, we trim hourly earnings at the very top and very bottom just to reduce the influence of outliers. And finally, we unfortunately at the moment do not use or cannot use Israel and Korea simply because, let's call it irregularities in the earnings data. Let me just show you what I mean. So the blue bars are cycle 2, and you see Israel and Korea, they have like these huge standard deviations, huge variation in earnings that simply cannot be real. So we're not using that at the moment, but maybe that gets fixed at some point too. All right, sample sizes, we have about 55,000 observations that are more or less evenly split across countries. Canada is an outlier in terms of sample size. They oversampled to provide a reliable regional analysis. Since we have a pooled estimation where we just, pool all the countries together, we want to make sure that Canada or other large samples are not dominating the results, so we weight the estimations in a way that each country has the same weight. So we're not getting just Canadian returns in a pooled sample. Very quickly, on the empirical model, I don't want to bore you too much with equations, but this is really kind of the simplest way how to estimate this. It's kind of a Mincer type regression where we regress log hourly wages on the skills, numeracy, and literacy, a standard Mincer spine, which is gender, experience, and experience squared as the main control variables, and we have country fixed effects for the pooled estimation as well. The estimates come in two flavors, either unconditional, what we call unconditional returns. Here we either include just numeracy or just literacy, and then we also have conditional returns, which are shown here, basically, where both are included, right? So here we interpret the returns as, for instance, returns to numeracy net of literacy or conditional on literacy. And this beta here is the return, or what we call returns to skills. It doesn't mean that it's causal, right? It's just a descriptive exercise. Okay, I skipped the descriptives. You have all read the PIAAC report anyway. And let's get to the unconditional returns. Okay, all graphs, or most graphs at least, will look like that. You have the gray bars on the left, which represent cycle 1 returns, and you have the blue bars on the right, which represent cycle 2 returns. I don't expect you to process everything. It's much too much. Let me just guide you through the most important results. So first of all, the pool. So this is just the average across countries, these lighter bars. And you see that indeed, as previous literature has shown, returns to skills have decreased on average. And not just on average, you see the same for countries like Singapore or Hungary or Germany or the US, right? But there are also countries where it was the other way around, like Chile and Estonia, right here on the left. Here actually returns have increased. And this can also be shown in this slightly simpler graph, where I just take the difference between the blue and the gray bar. And here you again see that in most of the countries, returns to numeracy skills have decreased, but there were also some countries, again, like Chile, Czech Republic, and so on, where this was not the case. How about literacy? Literacy looks just the same, unconditionally, right? Here's just one other way of presenting it. If you just plot the returns to literacy and returns to numeracy at the country level in one graph, you see it's basically the same, right? The regression coefficient is 1.001. So it's basically all on the 45 degrees line. So you can't really, I would argue, disentangle numeracy from literacy in this kind of pooled or in this kind of unconditional estimation, simply because they're 0.5 to 0.7 correlated, right? So when you include numeracy, you also have literacy in there and the other way around. So really what happens with the conditional returns, I think, is even more interesting. And here things really do change. I have 3 minutes left, but that's probably enough. So let's start with numeracy conditional on literacy, and let's go directly to this change graph, right? And you see right away there are many more countries actually where returns to numeracy skills have increased over time. Conditional returns have increased, like in the US or in Germany, right? Remember, these were countries where unconditional returns decreased. Conditional returns, though, they increase. On average, you still see, this is the gray bar here, it's probably a bit hard to see. On average, the returns still decreased a little bit, but it's mostly driven by Singapore, which is a clear outlier where returns have decreased by more than 20 percentage points, which is a lot, obviously. This is numeracy conditional on literacy. Let's now go to literacy conditional on numeracy, and you see here things get a little bit funny. There are countries like Estonia, Singapore, Japan in cycle 1, or Italy and the US in cycle 2, where returns are actually negative, right? They're never significantly negative, I should say, right? So if you would put confidence bands there, they would always include the 0, but that's very different from numeracy, where in each country, in each cycle, you always had positive returns. So that's the first thing to notice. The second thing is, you again have this huge cross-country heterogeneity in how the returns actually changed over time. On average, returns to literacy conditional numeracy changes 0, basically 0. But you have countries like Lithuania, Estonia, Singapore, where you see real large increases, and you have countries like the US or Poland or Canada, where there are large decreases. So that basically means if someone asks you, have returns to cognitive skills decreased over time, the answer is no, not necessarily. There are countries where returns have decreased, there are countries where returns have increased. But what you see is this super interesting rebalancing across domains. So here, this is the change in the conditional returns to literacy versus numeracy, right? And you see they are very strongly negatively correlated. That means a country that witnessed an increase in literacy returns is very likely to have witnessed a decrease in numeracy returns, and vice versa, right? And if you would look at that unconditionally, you would get exactly the opposite. You would see that they are very highly positively correlated, these changes, right? So conditional versus unconditional gives very different answers with this really interesting rebalancing across domains that we see for the conditional returns. And now the question, of course, is what is the reason? What is the explanation? And my answer is, I will tell you next time you invite me, because this is what we're currently working on. So thanks a lot, also on behalf of my nice co-authors. And now I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.